Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to discuss the Rambam's ruling in Hilchos Asuros, the laws of forbidden foods, where he speaks specifically about Yayin Nesech, forbidden wine. Yayin, wine that was poured for idol worship. And the Rambam rules here, Umuter Yisrael lahariach b'chavish shel Yayin Nesech, that it's permissible for a Jew to smell the wine that is Yayin Nesech in a barrel. What that refers to is that in order to determine that the wine was not spoiled and turned into vinegar, they would put some kind of a spigot into the barrel and they would smell the wine to see if it was turning into vinegar and spoiling. So even though it's Yayin Nesech, you're forbidden to have any benefit from that kind of wine. Certainly you can't drink it, but you can't have any benefit. But here you're allowed to smell the wine. Ve'ein bozeh shom isur, and there's no prohibition there. And the Rambam gives a reason. He says, she'ein hareach klum, lefi she'ein beimamish. The fragrance is nothing because it has no substance. Fragrance is not considered substance. Now this halacha is taken from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Samach Vav Amud Beis, and there's a dispute there between Abaye and Rava. Abaye says that it's forbidden because fragrance is also forbidden, and Rava says no, there's no problem with fragrance. And the Rambam rules according to Rava. But let's try to understand the reason for this. After all, the person is deriving benefit. The fragrance of wine is a pleasant fragrance. He's enjoying it, and that is forbidden, to have hana, to have pleasure from a forbidden substance. So there are several explanations in Rishonim. Tosfos explains that when the person makes the effort to smell the wine odor is so powerful that it actually harms you, and the harm overrides the pleasure, and therefore it's not a problem. The Rambam obviously does not give that as an explanation, because the Rambam adds a few words to the Gemara. The Gemara says that the reach is lav milsa, is not a matter. In other words, it's not forbidden. The Rambam clarifies that, and he adds the word she'ein beimamish, and has no substance. That means there's something lacking in the process of smelling, not that it's damaging, otherwise he would have said that. Other Rishonim, the Bal Hamor and the Ran, give a different explanation. They say it's eina miskaven, that he has no intention to derive pleasure. He's just smelling the wine to see if it's vinegar. He's not looking for the pleasure and the benefit involved. The problem with that explanation, the Ran himself addresses in another place, in Chulin, is that even though eina miskaven, when you have no kavana, it takes away the prohibition. That's true in all of the Torah. But nevertheless, there's an exception to that rule. When it's a psik ratio, when the result is inevitable, the example given in the Gemara Shabbos, where a person drags a heavy table and it creates grooves in the ground, which is forbidden on Shabbos, even though his kavanah, his intention is not to make the grooves, but if it's a heavy, very heavy table and the result is inevitable, then it's forbidden. It's like psik ratio b'lo yomos. It's like a person says, I'm going to cut off the head of a chicken, but I don't want it to die. I don't intend for it to die. That's ridiculous because it's inevitable. You cut the head off, it's inevitable that it's going to die. So here, it's inevitable when you're smelling the fragrance of the wine that you're going to derive pleasure from it. So the Ran says that psik resha b'hano, we don't use the concept of psik resha when it involves a prohibition of deriving pleasure, deriving benefit. The logic behind that could be explained that the concept of psik resha, there are two ways of understanding this, as the Kibbutz Shiurim explains. One way of explaining psik resha is that if a person does A and it leads to B, if his intention is only for A, then it's all right. But if B is inevitable, then it's as if he's really thinking about B as well, and his intention is for B. That's one approach. The second approach is that even though he's clearly focused on A and not on B, but because B is inevitable, it comes directly, it's a byproduct of A, they're considered to be one thing. So if you have kavanah for one, it's as if you have kavanah for the other, even though you actually didn't focus on it. If we take that approach, when could you connect B to A when B and A are both physical actions and physical results? But when B is something that comes without any action, it's just in experiencing the pleasure, the enjoyment of the smell of the wine, you can't connect that to the first act of smelling for the purpose of determining whether there is vinegar or not. Whatever the explanation is, that's the Baal Hamor and the Ran's explanation. The Ramban and other Rishonim, Rashba and others disagree with that, and they say, well, that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara doesn't talk about Eina Miskaven, that he has no intention. The Gemara just says it's Lav Milsa, that fragrance is nothing. It doesn't say it's not something he didn't intend to do. And the Ramban therefore gives another explanation, which needs clarification in its own right, and he says that when is it forbidden to have hana if the thing is intended for hana? But when something is not intended for hana, that's not its purpose. The purpose of this smelling is not for pleasure. The purpose of it is in order to determine whether it has vinegar or not. Therefore, it's not subject to the law of the prohibition of deriving benefit. The Rambam doesn't seem to maintain that explanation either, because the Rambam just says, Ein bei mamish, it has no substance. The Radvaz, one of the commentators of the Rambam, seems that he holds that the Rambam learns that the reason is Eina Miskaven. The Radvaz says that, the Gemara says, regarding the fragrance of the incense in the Beis HaMikdash, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from the sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash. However, it says loinen, and you can't have the benefit, but there's no serious violation called me'ilah. So from this, you could learn that if he intends to smell in order to enjoy the fragrance, it is forbidden, and they only allowed you when you don't have intention. So it seems the Radvaz explains the Rambam that it's also based on intention, just like the Baal Hamor and the Ran. Well, the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam says, Ein bei mamish, that Reach has no substance. If it was because of Eina Miskaven, as the Ramban asked, he should have said, the Fisha Eina Miskaven, because he doesn't have any intention. And we know that the Rambam himself rules that you're not allowed to smell the fragrance of besamim, of spices that belong to Avodah Zarah, that was used for idol worship. If it's Eina Miskaven, if he has no intention, then of course it wouldn't be a problem. But there, of course, he has intention. So that seems to prove the Radvaz's theory that it's because of Eina Miskaven, but the Rambam doesn't say it over here. Perhaps we could explain the Rambam that he doesn't have to say that it's Eina Miskaven, and yet he agrees with the explanation of the Radvaz. To understand this, I have to preface something in another area of halacha. The Magid Mishnah, the super commentary on the Rambam, raises a question about the Rambam's contradicting himself. There's a dispute in the Gemara if mitzvah tzrichas kavana. If a mitzvah needs to have kavana, you have to have intention to fulfill the mitzvah. The Rambam, Hilchos chametz and matzah, and the laws of eating matzah, rules that if a person was forced to eat matzah, he didn't have kavana, he nevertheless fulfilled his obligation. So the Rambam seems to rule, in accordance with that opinion, that mitzvahs do not require kavana. Yet in Hilchos Shofar, the Rambam rules that if a person heard the shofar and he didn't have kavana to fulfill his obligation, he did not fulfill his obligation, because you need kavana. You need to have the intention to fulfill the obligation. So which is it? The Rambam seems to be contradicting himself. Now, there is another answer, but I won't go into that. The Ran gives an answer, but we'll talk about the Magid Mishnah's own answer. And he says the following: the truth is that mitzvahs don't need kavanah. The act of the mitzvah itself is sufficient. But the mitzvah of shofar is not an action. Even the one who blows the shofar, the mitzvah is not blowing. The mitzvah is hearing. Hearing is aim by maisa. There's no action. So in order for you to fulfill the mitzvah, what connects you to the mitzvah, and I'm adding that as explanation, he doesn't use those words, but what connects you to the mitzvah is the action. But if there's no action over there, you need the kavanah to take the place of action, to connect you to the mitzvah. In a similar vein, although not identical, but in a similar vein, the prohibition of deriving benefit from the Yayin Nesech, since you don't have kavanah, there's no action over here. That's what the Rambam is saying. Reich ein beimam, smelling has no substance, there's no action. There's nothing involved, so there's nothing to connect you to it. So therefore, there's no problem. However, if you have kavanah, if you actually think, I'm going to have pleasure from this fragrance, that connects you to it. So it's not that it's eina miskaven. Usually when we say eina miskaven, we mean the following. The prohibition, the act of the prohibition is intact, is there. If you don't have kavanah, it detracts from it, it undermines it, and it makes it not forbidden. Here, it's the other way around. It's the kavanah that makes the prohibition. There's no act of prohibition over here. Smelling has no substance. So the Rambam doesn't have to say eina miskaven like the Ran says in the Bal Hamar, that here it's because you don't have kavanah. But here the actual act of smelling the wine has no substance. It is not an act of prohibition. The only thing that would make it an act, if you have specific kavanah, express intention, then it creates a relationship with the prohibition, and then it becomes forbidden. And that's why the Rambam rules that you can't smell the psamim of Avodah Zarah, because there the intention is it's intended for the pleasure, and there the intention is therefore for pleasure. Then it's forbidden. But over here, the intention is for something else, so there is no basis for the prohibition because reach ein bei mamish. Reach has no substance.